What's up, everyone? Sam here, Wall Street Mastermind. I'm back here today with another client interview for you guys. This time with our client Steve. Steve came to us at the end of August, so actually not too long ago. I guess it's been just over 2 months. He's a rising junior, and came to us right before the school year started. It was actually a referral from another client of ours, from Bradley. And originally, I think Steve was kind of a recruiting for a lot of different things: investment banking, consulting, private equity. Um, but I think that by the time he had come to Wall Street Mastermind, he had kind of narrowed it down to just investment banking. So ultimately, he was able to, despite the somewhat late start, he was able to land a very good offer that he's very happy with. And so I just wanted to get him to come on here and talk to you guys about how the process played out for him and share any advice that he might have for you guys. So, Steve, thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, so
Th-
I'm a
I guess,
Dartmouth
yeah.
junior.
Why don't you introduce yourself to everyone a little bit? Like, just give people a sense of kind of your background and what type of candidate you were when we first started working together.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a Dartmouth junior right now. So yeah, just took a quick just overview of my recruiting timeline. I entered my sophomore summer, which is this past summer, not really knowing what I wanted to do. So I'm a CS and econ double major,
Mm.
and I have a decent like 3.7 plus GPA. So I guess I had some options open to me, but I wasn't confident about investment banking at that juncture. So
Mm.
I kind of entered my sophomore summer, looking at investment banking, consulting, private equity, and just applying to a bunch of places through my college recruiting portal.
Mm.
And yeah, so I must have applied to like, I think 40 places, investment banking, consulting, PE, some other, random fields as well, out
Wow.
of which, I think maybe like there were 10 or 15 investment banks that I applied to,
Okay.
and most of them were boutique banks. So yeah, I kind of like got to understand these fields while applying. So that was my experience. I got a couple of first rounds, and then in prepping for the first rounds, I really understood, what investment bankers do, what skills they use, what type of, work summer analysts do on a daily basis. And I think it was at that point, like mid sophomore summer, that I realized that investment banking was really the experience I wanted to get out of my junior summer internship. I love the fact that all of the strategic analysis and all of the work you're doing was so grounded in numbers and just it was all to do with like company financials, and you just got to have a hand in these really large corporate transactions, which is like it's pretty rare for people our age.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and just for me, I wanted the best kind of intro to the business world, and I thought investment banking would be the best way to go for that.
Got it.
So
So if we pause right there for a second, so you applied to 40 companies, and 12 to or 10 to 15 of them were investment banks, right? Um, and those all happened before you joined Wall Street Mastermind, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
how many,
I hadn't even heard of Wall Street Mastermind up until this point,
got it,
largely because I didn't even know I wanted to go into investment banking. So I
got
hadn't really looked at really specializing in that process.
got it. And so what or roughly how many first round interviews would you say you got selected for out of the 40?
Right. So out of the 40, I think I got selected for uh, two investment banks, two boutique investment banks,
Mhm.
two or three PE firms, and then maybe four consulting firms.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So that's probably like 7 or 8 firms in total.
Seven or eight firms. And, I guess like just looking back, the mistake I made in this process was Just starting so late, not having an idea of what I'm really applying to or what I want out of the process.
Hmm.
So I definitely did spread myself too thin, and I also took hard courses that term,
Mm.
and just balancing, interview prep for each of these fields, which requires, what like the technicals is completely different from the case studies that you need to do for consulting, and then there's like a different prep for when you're for like the technicals in PE firms as well. So
Right.
I definitely I spread myself too thin. I was like really stressed throughout that term.
Yep.
Academics definitely did take a bit of a hit, and yeah, I mean, I guess I did do well in the sense that the two investment banks that I did interview for, I got Superdays for.
Mm. Okay.
Um,
So
yeah,
out of the eight first rounds, you got two super days, both within investment banks, basically.
exactly. Because I think after the first rounds, I realized I wanted to focus on investment banking, so I didn't really do any case study prep or PE prep. I kind of just did those interviews, uh,
Mm.
fully accepting that I'm probably not going to get it because I hadn't prepared. But
Got
investment banking, I did want, so I did spend time. At that point, I had like a lot of friends going through the process, so they did give me some guidance in terms of just read through Breaking to Wall Street for technicals, and then just behaviorals. Just the overarching the main questions that they're going to ask you. So I did prepare for those.
Mm. Got it. So then, like, you got those two super days with the boutique investment banks, and how did those interviews go? Or at the time, how did you feel like they went?
So going in again, I was still like pretty blind like to how this process works. And also I think the most important thing, I didn't know what they wanted, and that's something that you really need to know when you're going in. I mean, obviously you're going to be genuine and you're going to, speak to them about your interests and all of that, but you have to gear. What I didn't realize was that you have to really gear everything towards what bankers are looking for.
Mm. I,
It's Yeah. So at the time, I definitely thought it went well. I went to Boston for one of the super days, and this was a boutique, a tech focused investment bank. It
mhm.
was, yeah, Shea and Company, and I thought it went well. I met with maybe like six or seven, higher ups in the firm. I had like very interesting conversations with them. They told me they were very interested in my background.
Mm.
But I like looking back now, I definitely didn't do a good job tying things back to investment banking. That when they asked me to talk about my interests, I would talk about my interests, but just leave it there. I didn't really tie it back, which is
Mm.
very important.
Got
So
it.
yeah. Um, and
Okay.
then and then the other super day, it's a similar thing. I didn't do a good job really demonstrating my interest in investment banking.
Got it. Okay. So basically, at the time you went through the interviews, you came out of it feeling pretty good about it. Like, oh, I answered all their questions. It was mostly behavioral, right? Like, not that many technicals, but you were able to answer all their questions and probably somewhat optimistic, at least coming out of the interview, right? Um, and then eventually, obviously, you didn't get the offer, right? Um, so what did you do at that point? Like once you found out you didn't get the offer, like were you just trying to figure out like why you didn't get an offer or how did you feel at the time?
Yeah, so when I pretty much realized I didn't get the offer, like, the I think they didn't respond to me until like a week later, but I realized I didn't get the offer when I heard like some of my friends who were also interviewing,
Mm.
they got offers like that same day or like the next day.
I see.
So yeah, I mean, I was definitely I was, it's the thing about this process. It's not like an exam where you get back your answer sheet and you can see where you went wrong. It's just, there's there's just you never know. And I was in that place. I just thought like, oh well, I guess I wasn't a good fit. Uh, but you know, it is about that to a certain extent, but it's also just about my preparation was lacking for investment banking.
Right.
I didn't realize the importance of really kind of preparing your behaviorals and just having answers up your sleeves for like the important questions, and like good answers, like quality answers that would really pique their interest in you.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I guess like after the Super Days, I went back home because the term had ended. This was like right at the end of the term. So I went back home. I really mulled over kind of like, you know, again like what I wanted to do now, because uh I hadn't gotten offers from my two prospects that term, and then like I didn't really know how to go about applying to places, just like through their portals, or like I didn't know about the process, because all of these places, these 40 places I'd applied to, were through my were through the professional network at my school.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I was like, I felt pretty clueless, and I definitely felt the need for some direction and guidance at that point.
Mm.
And so I remembered like earlier that summer, one of my friends, Bradley, who goes to Dartmouth and is also one of Sam's students. I remember him telling me, and like he obviously, I mean, he's like almost like famous in our school. He did very well. He got like he got I don't know, like 4 or 5 offers from like the top banks. So I remembered him telling me, how much help it was to use Sam's program, and he really kind of stressed that I should at least do a call with Sam, like the strategy call or whatever you call it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so after I didn't get the 2 offers, I did that. I reached out to Sam. I uh, just told him my situation,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, then I started on the program. But again, this was, I think, when I officially started, it was like I think like mid-September almost.
Yeah.
That was when I officially started the program. I think I talked to Sam like 10 days before,
Yeah.
but uh, yeah, so it was definitely very late in the process. I went through the modules of the program, and I started reaching out to people and networking and applying through these company portals, and it was hard. I didn't I didn't hear back from like anyone, and
Because it was so late in the game, and a lot
exactly.
of these firms had already finished recruiting, basically.
Exactly. And so networking, I would talk to like maybe 5 people a week.
Mm. Had
And
you been doing much networking up to this point, like prior to this?
not at all. Not at all. Like I didn't do any networking over the summer. Whatever first rounds I got was just like, I guess they
Purely
like,
based off of the fact that you're like solid on paper, basically.
yeah, I would say.
You go to a good school, you got good grades, and you have like a pretty tough majors, and so and you have some relevant experience as well, right? And so probably just based on the merits of that, you're able to get stuff through on campus, like the on campus recruiting process. But now that on campus was over, you kind of had to go out on your own and try to find these opportunities um, through your own networking efforts. And so that's why you started doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and it's not an easy process because you're sending out hundreds of emails, and you're basically getting a lot of rejections, in the sense that when people don't reply, it's generally they're just not interested. And so that was something I had to I guess I was prepared to deal with, because I understood that this is the process, just because I had that guidance at that point. So
Mm-hmm.
I really I guess I didn't get too disheartened. I just kept going at it. uh and yeah, I guess like a learning lesson is you kind of have to just like keep going at it, until you will get something that you're happy with. You're gonna have to like go into this process having that faith, uh and and yeah, just like You have to go hard. And
Yeah.
then like, yeah, so
What would you say? What would you say was the? I mean, outside the fact that obviously you weren't doing networking at all before, but and now you are. But like, what would you say was like the biggest difference in terms of how you thought about networking and how to approach it in general? Like, I'm sure you learned a bunch of stuff that you probably just had never thought of before, right? Since you had never networked. Like, what would you say was like the most helpful thing on that side?
yeah, I think, yeah. So, like going into the process, I'd heard of this thing called networking. I was just like, I mean, what is that? Like, how does it help? I kept asking people like, what tangible difference does it make?
Mm,
And I guess like even my friends at the time, they didn't really have an answer,
mm,
you know? And this was in sophomore summer. So I was like, okay, well, like, I mean, if there's no real reason to do it, then I won't do it. But yeah, I mean, I like what I didn't realize is like networking is kind of is like at the very core of this process. It's like you have to network to really to to really get considered.
yeah.
It's really hard to get first rounds at places and like at top banks if you haven't networked and if you don't have anyone in the firm who's kind of vouching for you. And that's something I didn't realize until it was very late.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But
Okay.
yeah.
So you got a lot better at networking, and you now understood like the rationale and the importance behind why you network, and then you started doing that, and then um, what about on like the interview side of things? So I think you mentioned earlier, like prior to Wall Street Mastermind, the way that you have prepared was primarily just by what, like talking to other friends that were going through the process, and then they recommended that you use the Breaking into Wall Street guide. Were those basically the all the resources that you used, or like what else were you doing to prepare prior to Wall Street Mastermind?
Yeah, it was basically just talking to people, talking to maybe like other Dartmouth alums in the field, or talking to my friends who were more experienced with the process or who'd gotten offers, and then just doing some like online research, just kind of very random, unstructured research,
I
which is very, very time consuming. I would not, you know, I mean, it's something I guess like you have to do if you don't have a structured program like Wall Street Mastermind. But yeah, I realized it was a very inefficient way to prepare for the process.
I see. So is the biggest difference between what you were doing before versus what you began doing after Wall Street Mastermind just the fact that you now had a structure around how you were going to approach this, and it was very step by step and everything's laid out, and you basically just had to execute on the plan that's laid out for you, as opposed to having to kind of second guess whether you're doing the right things all the time? Or like what would you say made the biggest difference, I guess, in terms of how you were preparing before versus how you were preparing after?
Yeah, so yeah, that's interesting. I think before I I really wasn't focused on like I was just focused on getting an offer, like whatever it took. Like I didn't really focus on the steps I would need to take to do that. I
Hmm.
kind of just went with the process. I'm like, okay, I'll just prepare these questions and hopefully it'll be good enough. But I mean, this process, it really doesn't work like that. You really have to, like it's such a competitive process and you have people who want it so bad. Like you have to step up your game, to compete with them.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's something I learned the hard way. I didn't get those two offers. So yeah, so I didn't really, look at like the way I look at it now is, or the way I looked at it now when I, resumed the process with Wall Street Mastermind is just like my aim was to take it step by step and kind of perfect each step of the process. So for networking, I spent like maybe a good week just, um, I guess like preparing my resume or like changing it up just to gear it more towards investment banking. And then, just like preparing. the questions I would ask them, and preparing my elevator pitch, and just like really honing in each micro step
Mm-hmm.
in this macro process
Mm-hmm.
to then achieve the result I wanted. So I definitely paid more attention to the smaller things, I think. And
Got
then
it. So you were
even
able to break it down into, you had
yeah,
this overarching goal of I want to get an offer in investment banking, but
yeah,
you were able to clearly break it down to kind of smaller bite-sized pieces or like different milestones you will have to hit along the way. And then you can be very deliberate about hitting those milestones and then also doing them in the right order, um, so that it kind of builds up to the ultimate outcome you wanted, which is that offer.
yeah. I mean, like, it's like this process. Like if you break it down, it's you have to basically just nail like these four things, right? It's just like your resume, cover letter is like one thing. Then you gotta really know how to network and know how to leverage your network well. And then the third thing is then behaviorals, and then you gotta know your technicals as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, each of those, if you kind of perfect each of those steps, I realized like that's the key. That's the key to getting the offer you want.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So how would you say so we've talked about like, revamping your application materials and we helped you with that, right? Then we taught you how to network. And then so now you are equipped with kind of the two things that you needed to be able to get interviews. But then like on the interview preparation side of things, like how did your behaviorals change after working with us? Like, what was different about it? Because obviously, you already had whatever answers you had before, right? The ones that you felt like were pretty good, although they didn't get you the offer. And then, how much do you think that your answers changed after we kind of went through it together?
Yeah, I think definitely the biggest difference was just like gearing all my answers to why invest in banking, like tying it back to why I like my internships or my experience at college, or like my experience as a CS student, like why all of that will make me a good investment banking summer analyst. Like that was I think the main difference. And then just like smaller things like uh that, I guess, as college students we wouldn't really know. Like I guess bankers have certain pet peeves, and
Hmm.
that was pretty useful to really understand what is it like a no, what you
Hmm.
shouldn't say. I
Hmm.
think that's is almost as important as what you should say, because
Right.
one sort of derogatory or like bad thing you say that might tick them off, and like you're, no matter how good your answers are after that, you've kind of already uh, ruined your impression in their mind.
Right. Because so sometimes you might say something that you feel like is harmless, or obviously otherwise you wouldn't say it, but you don't even realize that you're shooting yourself in the foot. And if no one tells you about it, you might just continue to do that every single interview, which would be a horrible thing to do, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So we revised all your behaviorals. Um, we probably gave you a lot more confidence and certainty and just the quality of your answers going into the interview because they've been vetted, right? Um,
For sure. Yeah.
what about on like the technical side? Like what do we do together on the technical side for you?
So for the technical side, to be honest, yeah. So for the technical side, like over the summer, I think I had prepared very well.
Mm,
Because that was something. It was concrete. It was structured. It was something. I guess um um it was like something I was very comfortable doing versus behaviorals, which is so kind of subjective and all of that. So over the summer, I was actually, I think I would say, like better than most of the people I was applying with, who maybe even got better offers, but I was still better than them at the technical side of things.
mm,
Uh, which I guess like just goes to show, like technicals is a huge part of it. Like you need to know your technicals, but that alone is not going to get you the offer. It has to be in tandem with like solid behaviorals as well.
Right. Yeah. People always, I feel like people, when it comes to investment banking recruiting, they always get this idea that for whatever reason, they get this idea that the technicals are the most important part, right? Because I think there's probably two reasons why people feel that. One is it's very obvious when you miss a technical question, right? Like it's very obvious to the interviewer, it's very obvious to yourself that you got the question wrong, and then so people feel a lot more self-conscious about it. But I think the other reason why there's so much more emphasis on technicals is because almost all the resources you find out there are exclusively focused on teaching you technicals, right? Like financial modeling courses, technical interview guides, whatever Rosenbaum textbook, like this is just where all the emphasis is on in the market. But in reality, like you said, if you know all your technicals, but your behaviorals aren't very good, um, it's going to be really hard to actually stand out from the rest of your competition, right? Because even if you know your technicals, some of your competition is going to know their technicals as well, right? And then so it's like, what's the differentiating factor, right? Since it's a kind of like a pass fail thing. If everyone's passing, then that alone is not going to get you the job, right? But then on the behavioral side, like you said, it's like so subjective, right? So open ended. It's both a good and a bad thing, right? The bad part is it's hard for you to know whether you're doing a really good job or not. Like a lot of people, they experience the same thing as you, where they come out of an interview and they feel like, oh, that interview went really well, except they don't get the offer, right? But the good part is like because it's so subjective, that means that there's actually an opportunity for you to like set yourself apart from everybody else by having an answer that's much better than everyone else's. Right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. Like that's yeah, I think like behaviorals is it's just one of those things you don't yeah, it's just it is subjective, but at the same time it's there is like you can tell the difference between a good answer and a bad answer for an investment banking interview.
Right. Maybe not necessarily like on your own. Sometimes it's hard to tell just how good your own answer actually is because you're the one that wrote it, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no,
But
I'm saying like to the other person, I guess.
yeah, but to the other person, there is still like there's no like quote unquote right or wrong, but there's still like a better answer and a worse answer.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
And so basically you need someone to help you figure out, someone who's experienced and qualified enough to help you figure out how to make your answer a better answer, right?
Right.
Um, and I would say, like, honestly, to do that, like, it comes down to experience, right? It comes down to, like, hey, to know what's actually a better answer, you need someone who's actually seen a ton of different people answer these questions, right?
Mm,
Because otherwise, what are they comparing you against, right? Like, nothing, right?
that-
Um, okay, so fix your behaviorals. You're already solid on the technicals, and then now you know how to network, and your application materials are fixed. So you pretty much had checked all the boxes, right?
yep.
Uh, so like, how many interviews did you have after you joined Wall Street Mastermind?
I so again, like I entered the process late. I I started reaching out to people like mid-September.
Well,
Uh and again, even like that process, like there is a slight learning curve,
yep.
which
Yeah, it
yeah, I
doesn't
mean,
happen
it was
overnight, right?
sorry, what?
I said, yeah, it doesn't happen overnight, right?
Exactly. It is a grueling process. And especially when you start that late, just people are not that interested. Either they're like almost done hiring, or they're like, or they are just done hiring.
Right.
So yeah, I had a lot of trouble. I think throughout September, I was reaching out to people. I didn't get any first rounds really. Like I had some. I guess like one of the things that I found a little confusing in the process was a lot of the times when people agreed to talk to you,
Hmm.
uh, it was unclear whether the phone call is going to be a just a networking call, or you know what, there were some times where like they would be aggressively questioning me,
Mm.
you know, so you kind of have to go in preparing for both.
Yep.
uh, and you know, like, yeah, and that's what happened for like a couple of places, and the first time it happened I was caught completely off guard, you know, like these people were asking me like technicals, you know, in what was supposed to be a networking call.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think one like huge takeaway was going in prepared, you know, for anything that
Yep.
they could throw at you. So perfecting those things, uh, you know, potentially even before you start networking, which requires just a lot of foresight and time, you know, starting
Well,
early.
you bring up that's great advice for people, by the way. You bring up a good point, which is a lot of times I hear people say, "Well, I'm just going to focus on, my resume and application materials and the networking part first, and then I'll study for the interviews after, if and when I know I'm actually going to get interviews. But if I don't get interviews, there's no point studying for the interviews first because that's going to be a waste of my time, right?" And I
Right.
always tell them, well, it doesn't really work that way because a lot of the times, like, I mean, networking is really just another form of interviewing, right?
Yeah,
Like,
no, I
yeah,
agree.
like, even if they don't ask you any technicals and it's just a conversation, like, your behavioral interview skills still come into play, right? In terms of like how you talk about yourself and what kind of questions you ask them and how you make yourself stand out. It's a lot of similarities, right? But sometimes, like, depending on the banker that you run into, like, they might grill you on the technicals just to see if you are a legitimate candidate, right? Because what they're doing is they don't want to have to like go and raise their hand and vouch for you or stick their neck out if you're not even someone who's going to be able to do well in the interview, because then they don't want to look bad, right? And so they're kind of like testing you to cover their own ass, so to speak, right? And if you can't answer their questions or whatever, then you're probably not someone that they're going to go out of their way to help, right?
Right, 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 right. Yeah, you know, I'm just remembering this one example. I had a call set up with a VP at RBC in
Yeah.
San Francisco, the tech group.
Hmm.
And yeah, so you know, and this was earlier in the process. So I got on the call, you know, prepared with my elevator pitch, my you know, there's the questions I'd want to ask, and then you know the follow ups and all of that. And and yeah, you know, once the call started, I was a little taken aback when he kind of took the reins and like started like he immediately started questioning me, you know.
Hmm.
And so yeah, you know, you know, I think I did, you know, decently with like he asked me like why invest in banking, why tech, all of that, even though I hadn't really prepared for that because it was a networking call.
Hmm.
But and then he asked me like I think a very simple technical question like how do you value a company? Tell me like 5 ways or something like that. And you know, I answered that, but I fumbled just a bit, and he kind of just told me straight up, you know, he's like, I love Dartmouth kids, and you know, you seem like a great candidate, but like clearly, you know, like people who prepared in this process can reply, like normally have like just very crisp responses to these questions,
Hmm.
which you know, which was it was definitely disappointing to hear at the time,
Hmm.
but I mean, he was really nice about it. He told me, you know, read up about the group, prepare better, and then like contact me next week. But I mean, that was a huge learning lesson for me to kind of, you know, you really have to cover all your bases before these conversations, and
Yep.
because especially if you're talking to higher ups, like you really like, you know, you can't really have any glaring flaws at all. You know,
Yeah.
you kind of have to. So yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's great advice for everyone that's listening right now. Is like, guys, you gotta, like, Steve talked about the four different areas that you need to have nailed down. Like, you gotta be doing those four things simultaneously. You cannot, put some of them off until later on. It just doesn't work like that, right? And so that's really, really good advice. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I guess let's can we tell people kind of like what was the ultimate outcome for you? Like, obviously you eventually did get an interview, right? Um, and then like what happened from there?
Yeah, definitely. So I think this was maybe late September, start of October. Just my routine reaching out to people. I I reached out to a VP at TD Securities in New York in the energy group because my that was another thing I realized through the process, that I was getting a lot more responses from people in energy
Mm.
because I had a lot of experience in energy. You know, I interned at the Ministry of Renewable Energy and had started a nonprofit that dealt with micro renewable energy technologies.
Yeah.
So that was something, like every application is different. And for me, I found that to work. I got a lot of responses just reaching out to VPs and associates in energy groups at these big banks.
Yeah, you're playing to your strengths.
Exactly. Yeah. So I reached out to one of the VPs, and uh, just starting out, like the start of the phone call, I had so many bad phone calls up till that point. Phone call was great, just from the get go. He told me he was very interested in my background. He would he yeah. So and then he basically, I think even before we like talked about anything, he told me that he would love to like connect me to one of his associates or like his or another VP.
Hmm.
And that after like hearing so many people say like, oh, we're done hiring, or like, oh, definitely like reach out for full time or whatever. It was great to hear that. And that just goes to show, if you keep at it, like you will get a positive response at some point.
Hmm.
So um
Combined, combined with the fact that you got to be strategic about where you target your efforts, right?
for sure, yeah, you have to put in all this effort and intelligent effort, but yeah, I think if you keep at it, it
And play to your strengths.
yeah, exactly.
Got-
So yeah, so he basically he then connected me to a VP at TD, and or another VP at TD, and then I also talked to an associate, and then I think like maybe like 10 days later I had a super day,
Mm.
which was, I mean, it was very exciting, and it was and then at that point I was very confident. I talked to people at the firm, they liked me, they liked my background. And I was very happy with the way my behaviorals were coming out. My technicals were strong. So all I really had to do was just, I think I can like safely say going in, and like Sam knows this as well. Like I think I told him I was like very confident, because I had all these resources at my disposal, and I knew that I would probably be the most competitive applicant.
Mhm, mhm.
So yeah, I
Yeah,
went for the super
like,
day.
and I mean, like at that point, I remember because we were prepping for your TD interview, and so I was reviewing your behavioral answers, and I always remember this. But we have obviously like some questions that you're for sure going to get, right? Like,
Right.
oh, tell me about yourself, and why do you want to do investment banking, and why do you want to work for our bank, or even like this group specifically, right? So like those questions are like no-brainers that everybody's always got to prepare for, right? And I think most people do prepare for those, but I just remember um, reading your answers for those questions specifically and thinking like, wow, these are really, really good, right?
Right.
I think I remember. I don't know if you remember, but like the feedback I gave you, I think I said that, right? I was like, dude, these are really good, and I think I made like some minor tweaks, but like we, for
Yeah.
the most part, left those as is, right? Some of your other answers, like your stories and stuff like that, like we had to make more changes, but
Yeah,
at
no,
least, like,
I definitely improved. Like, I don't know if I probably didn't send it back to you at the time because like I had my interview coming up, but like I changed those around a lot. I tied all of them back to investment banking, and yeah, basically like I implemented all of the notes you gave me.
yeah,
Um,
but the biggest thing is like for those like 3 or 4 guaranteed questions or whatever,
yeah,
like you probably smash those out of the park like so
yeah,
hard that like if you can do that, honestly, like the rest of your interview becomes so much more easier, right? Because like at that point they have a great first impression of you, and they're just gonna they're like that's how interviewing works. That's how human beings are. It's like whatever our first impression is of someone, if it's good, then like the rest of the interview, we're just like looking for evidence to support our opinion that this person is good, right? But like if our first impression of this person is bad, then we're going to be looking for evidence to support our opinion that this person is bad. And so it's almost like getting off to that good start is so crucial, right? Because it makes everything else so much easier. And I think you probably did that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I definitely think those, like, just to tell me about yourself, and then, why this group and why energy investment banking, like those answers I could tell. And like a lot of them like were, like they told me straight up, like, wow, that was a great answer. Like you hit all the points. I'm like, thank you. And it gives you a lot of confidence then to like to then take on, the maybe harder or more unstructured questions after, like, later on in the interview, which is kind of what happened to me. I uh there were like there were the technicals for this interview were actually harder than I expected.
Hmm.
Even made me the one of the VPs made me do a paper DCF, and I'd never done one before.
Hmm.
But I had to have those concepts down so well that I was able to, to do it, and to like show him that I had the just the knowledge to do it, even like despite him knowing that I hadn't done a paper DCF before. And I think that's what like maybe really locked it down in his head. This was the VP that I was in touch with from the start. Like he literally came in. I think he knew that he already really liked me as a candidate. He just needed to make sure I had the technicals down. I had like the technical
Yeah.
quantitative skills that they would need. And yeah, so you like, no matter how much you prepare, like you are going to be thrown some oddball questions that you're going to have to take on. So I think one thing to keep in mind is just to go in knowing you're going to have those situations, and to just have the faith that you'll be able to, just because you've prepared well enough, you'll be able to really answer whatever sort of weird questions they give you.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, look, man, Steve, you gave our listeners a ton of just really valuable advice on this call today, I feel like. And thank you for being just so open and vulnerable about talking about all the ups and downs in your own process, and just how much of a grind it was. Yeah, like a lot of times I feel like when you hear people's success stories, or like people that are recruiting, they see their friends getting jobs, and all they see is what's on the surface of like, oh, this person got so many jobs or whatever. Or like back when you were looking at Bradley, you're probably feeling the same thing. Just like, wow, Bradley got like 4 or 5 offers. It seems like he's having it so easy. But like behind the scenes, there's a lot of hard work and preparation, and a lot of time rejections along the way that people just don't see or hear about, right? And so I think that's really valuable for everyone else. Just like, look, having those challenges during this process is totally normal, but it's more how you deal with those challenges, right? Whether you continue to push forward or whether you give up. And then like, if you do choose to push forward, more importantly, like, what are you actually doing about these challenges? Like, what are you actually doing to fix the mistakes that you're making, or even identify what they are in the first place, right? And like, what are you doing to actually make yourself into a better candidate, right? And I think that you definitely did that every step along the way, right? And which is why you were ultimately able to get to a very successful outcome, and an outcome that I think you're quite happy with, right?
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, yeah, it was, I went into the process, not like it, after getting those rejections, I went into the process very underconfident. And I think at each stage, just like preparing for like just like prepping the resume, and then the networking, and then the behaviorals, definitely it builds your confidence, and it gives you strength and the resilience to really like push through,
Yeah.
pursue all the rejections and the the sort of negative responses you get, and then until you get a positive one.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm looking forward to like leveraging these skills in the future as well, because this is just the beginning. So
Yeah, absolutely. You got a long, successful career ahead of you. So whether it's interviewing or networking or your application materials, like these are all life skills that you've developed, right? And this is really, really valuable experience. I'm sure it's going to come up over and over again as you continue to do big things. And so, very excited to see what's in store for you. And obviously, huge congrats on all the success so far. I'm glad your recruiting process had a happy ending, a happy outcome. So, um, for the rest of you who are listening to this, I think if you are in a similar situation as what kind of Steve described, like maybe you are a very qualified candidate, maybe you uh, have been doing a lot of work on your part, or maybe you're strong in certain areas already, but there's just like, one or two missing pieces that you currently don't have, and you're not quite sure how to figure it out on your own. And you're also maybe a little bit late to the process, and you don't have all the time in the world to figure this out slowly. um, I would encourage you to reach out and see if we can help you, right? uh, we're not always going to be able to help you. It really is like case by case, depends on the person and the situation. But what we always do is um, first learn about your situation, and then give you a very honest assessment of what we think is possible for you and what we can help you accomplish, right? And if we come up with an outcome that is very satisfactory to you, then obviously it would make sense for us to work together. But like, if we don't think we can do that, then that's totally cool too. We'll still do our best to just give you advice on what we think we would do if we were in your shoes, right? So if that's something that you guys are interested in doing, I would start by scheduling a free strategy session with our team. So you can do that by going to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street in Wall Street Mastermind is abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And yeah, you'll hop on a phone with someone on our team. We'll learn about your situation. We'll help you customize something that's a game plan that's tailored for you, and talk to you about what we think the likely outcome is for you, and then to see if it's a good fit. All right. And so um, I think that'll be it for today, guys. Steve, again, I want to thank you so much for just taking the time to come on here and talk to us about your experiences. And definitely let's stay in touch as you go through your internship next summer. Keep me posted on how everything goes. And, looking forward to hearing about all the success that you have ahead of you.
thank you. Yeah, no, I'm happy to share my experience, and yeah, it's great talking.
Awesome, man. Well, guys, that'll be it for today. So thank you guys for tuning in. And as always, we'll be back with more of these in the near future. All right. Talk to you guys later.